So last week we did some figure painting. This week I figured what we'd do is sit down, it's kind of reverse order, but I thought we'd look at a kit and talk about how to put it together, a plastic model. So I've got my tools out here and we'll discuss the tools, so stay tuned. So we're going to put a plastic figure kit together today, and what I want to do first is just discuss some of the tools that we're going to use, and most importantly we're going to use these nippers. I have two pairs of tools here, two pairs of cutters. This is a heavy-duty pair of cutters, and they're from Xuron. These I use to cut big parts, heavy parts off the sprues, and these are my Tamiya clippers, and I use these for fine work where I don't want to damage these because they're really fine and really precise. So you got your clippers, and then I also have a set of X-Acto knives here, and the X-Acto knives, these razor knives, I use these to trim parts. After I cut them off with that, I'll trim the parts with a razor knife. Also, what you're going to need will be putty, so that if there's a seam line where you put the two parts together, you can fill it with some putty. I usually use Tamiya putty, but there's various others available. After you putty the parts, you're going to have to sand down that putty, so you're going to have to get some sandpaper. I like to use Tamiya. You'll notice I like to use a lot of Tamiya product. Tamiya tools are probably the best out there. So I take these sheets of sandpaper and I cut them up into strips so that they're easy to handle and sand. Next thing we need is glue. I like to use liquid cement, and I have some I have some Flexifile glue here, liquid cement. I have some Tamiya liquid cement and some thicker Tamiya cement. These cements are nice. Usually they come with a little brush in the lid so you can apply it right on a seam line. And I also have sanding sticks. So that's a basic rundown of the tools that we're going to use. So let's get to work. Okay, so I've picked out a really nice figure kit. You can see this is the 1966 Batman from Moebius models. Thought it would be really fun to do. So basically the first step, and this is the best step of any plastic model, is opening the box. I love ripping the plastic off. Get rid of it. Pop the box open. I'll put my glasses on. And it comes in a nice light blue plastic. Pull the bags out. Now, most important thing, take your instructions. Open them up and familiarize yourself with the kit. In other words, take a look at the instructions, see what the assembly sequence is. You can see, step 1 through whatever. Look at the parts, get a feel for it. Then what we'll do after we do that is I'll grab a bag of parts, pop it open. A pair of scissors to do this. You can see, as I said before, I'm going to grab my nippers out of here. You can see each set of parts comes on what's called a runner or a sprue. This is the way they mold the parts in two pieces. There's a big steel mold, it's two parts, pops out, part comes out, and you can see they're attached. All these parts are attached. So I still need to look at my instructions to see exactly what parts to cut out. But if you zoom in here, I'll show you that where the attachment points are, I'll take my nippers, just clip the part off. And what I'm going to do is go back, look at the parts, and we'll get our X-Acto knife. This is where your knife comes in handy. I'm going to take your X-Acto knife. Wherever I cut those little parts off of the sprue, there's going to be a little mark or a little piece of, extruded plastic. I'll take my X-Acto knife and I'll just trim those parts off. And there was one up on the top here. I did a pretty good job. There's not much on the top. Then what I'll do is I'll take a piece of sandpaper or a sanding stick and I'll just give it a little sand where those little part points are. Okay, so that's basically it. You take your part off the sprue with your clippers, and you take your X-Acto knife and trim any excess plastic on a little piece of sanding stick, sand them off, and that cleans them up so that you can put them together. So we'll move on from there. Let's glue a few parts together. I'll show you how to do this, how to use the liquid cement. I'm going to use this Tamiya liquid cement. Great stuff, has a brush in the bottle. And I cut the leg pieces off because they're big enough for me to have you see in the video. It actually starts with his head and torso and then goes into the legs, but these legs can be assembled because they're separate from everything else. So let's take a set of these legs, right in the left half, and I've trimmed off any of the extra plastic, and it looks like they have bosses and pins that you just stick together. So this is somewhat like a plastic snap together kit, but it really isn't. So I'm going to just line up those pins. You can see I'm going to put this pin into this hole, get it started, and as I push these together, you can see they're snapping together. Now before I push them totally tight, I'm going to get my glue out here and open it up, and be really careful with this glue that you don't spill it. You can see there's a little pinpoint applicator in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap these together, and you heard that snap. I'll throw my optivisors on here to make sure I don't miss anything. Then I'm going to take this glue and just run it right down that seam line between the parts. And the capillary action of the liquid, it's almost like water consistency. It's going to go right and flow down in there, and as I squeeze it together, I can see the plastic soften up. And that's a good thing, because that works like a filler. So I'm just going to keep going all the way down the leg, right along the seam line, and squeeze it together. You can see, I can already see there's going to be a little bit of gap in the boots. We're going to have to use some filler on that. So I'm just going to go down, and I'll keep doing this until I get the whole leg glued together. Then we'll come back and look at sanding and filling the seam lines. But yeah, I can see already that I'm going to have to do some filling right on this seam line on the boot. Okay. We've glued together the leg sections for this model, and they're nice and dry. So what I got to do is, if I want to do a really good job, I want to eliminate the seam lines, because real people don't have big seam lines running down their body. So what I'm going to do is, I have a couple tools here that I'll use. Number one is a file, a needle file. These are Tamiya needle files, and they come in different shapes. The one that I like to use for figures is this round file. So it's just basically a round file. And I have some sandpaper and my knife if I need it. So what I'll do is, and you can come in close here and we'll look at this. I'll take a really good look at this seam line here, and I'll take my file and I'll just run it down the seam line. And you can see it turning white. That means it's blending the edges down. It's going to make them nice and smooth. So I'll do this, and I'll go over the whole figure, or over the leg. And I'm going to pop my optivisors on here so I can see. And I'll run it down here. And I'm noticing as I go down his boot here, there's a gap in the boot. So what I'll do also after that, after I run the needle file down, I'll take my sandpaper, and I'll just take the sandpaper and run it over this edge. And the whole objective here is to get this seam line nice and smooth. I'll run it down his leg. So I'm going to do this on the whole thing, but in the meantime, what I'm going to do is, and I want to get the sanding out of this. So you can see there's a gap in the boot here. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take some of this Tamiya filler, or this putty, and I'm going to put a little bit of it on my plastic. And what we'll do is, we'll look at the seam line here, and we'll take some of this putty and just fill the seam in. And you don't have to be super neat, but you should try to be somewhat neat. You don't want it everywhere. Just run it along the edge of that line. And this is kind of tedious, and it's hard to do the whole thing on a video here, but what I'll do is I'll work along this, and I'll run some of this putty down the seam line. Then we'll come back and look at it after the putty's dry, and we'll sand it down. So stay tuned for that. We're going to wrap it up for today, and you can see what I've done is I went ahead and I sanded this leg down, and you can see the white stripe down here. That's not a racing stripe. That's the putty, the Tamiya putty that I put in to fill the gap that's in his boot. And what I'll do is I'll take this file And I'll very carefully go along and I'll just sand down on it. And I'm just going to do a little bit here so you can see that as I sand it off, it leaves it right in the gap there where it was. So after I sand it down with a file, I'll do the whole thing, then I'll take a little bit of sandpaper and just go over it. And if you do it correctly, Rocky's here, you'll see that it fills in that seam line. And I'll do that on all this leg, the other leg, and I'll go home and I'll take the kit with me and I'll put all the other body parts together and clean everything, sand it all down. Then when you come next week, next Sunday, we'll go back and we'll do probably assembly on all the parts. Okay, so we'll see you next Sunday here at AAA Hobbies in Magnolia, New Jersey. And come by. If you want to come by and watch me do this, every Sunday I'm sitting here doing some plastic modeling.